Just because a wrestler is fired or decides to willingly leave WWE, though it's typically the former, doesn't mean that they won't be brought back at some point in the future. We've seen plenty of great and not so great WWE comebacks before, but we've also seen former stars get re-signed for seemingly no reason, as they oftentimes don't even make it to our TV screens, coming and going without wrestling fans even realizing that they were back in the first place. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 utterly pointless WWE re-signings. Join us. But before we start, this video is sponsored by NordVPN. We at Cultaholic truly believe that Nord is the best service of its kind. It's super easy to use, connect with one click, or enable auto-connect for zero-click connection, giving you the fastest possible speeds out there. The speed tests prove it. But Adam, why do I need NordVPN? I hear ya. Well, you can purchase subscriptions to video-on-demand services, websites. You can even get cheaper flight bookings by setting your virtual location to somewhere else in the world and saving heaps of cash. You will soon see that Nord pays for itself. But it doesn't stop there. Nord is a one-stop shop for all of your cybersecurity needs, protecting up to 6 of your devices from viruses, malware, hackers, personal data theft, intrusive ads, and so much more. I genuinely use Nord and I couldn't be happier with it. It's the equivalent of a cup of fancy coffee every month, which I'm sure you'll agree is a small price to pay for serious peace of mind when it comes to all things digital. And there's even a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you're not completely satisfied, you get your money back. So grab your exclusive deal by heading to nordvpn.com/cultaholic. The link is in the description below, or use code Cultaholic at checkout. Thank you. Number 10, Flash Funk. After successful runs in Japan, WCW and ECW, the dynamic Too Cold Scorpio signed with WWE in 1996 and was repackaged as Flash Funk, a gimmick that was pushed heavily to start with but soon petered out. As did Too Cold's WWE career, as he dropped the funk, became a member of the Job Squad, and ultimately left the company in early 1999, returning to Japan and the independent scene for the next 7 years. Scorpio received a WWE tryout match against Rene Dupree at the August 22, 2006 SmackDown taping, and was said to have impressed those watching, including then World Heavyweight Champion Booker T, who pushed heavily for his signing. A month later, and after dropping Noah's GHC Hardcore title, Too Cold was signed to a 3-year deal, even though some decision makers had their reservations due to his weight gain and previous drug issues, which led to his firing the first time around. Resurrecting the Flash Funk gimmick, Scorpio did 1 tour of Europe, 1 dark match, and 1 match for developmental territory Deep South Wrestling before being released in May 2007. Maddeningly, WWE brought him back to television months later for Raw's 15-year anniversary after they'd already canned him. Number 9, Henry O. Godwinn. When Mark Canterbury, who wrestled as Henry O. Godwinn in WWE, was forced to retire due to a broken neck in 1998, it was assumed that his in-ring days were over, which they were for about 8 years before he curiously received a WWE tryout just a couple of weeks after Too Cold Scorpio had his. The former tag team champion actually had a few tryouts, including one against Bull Buchanan, who may have also been looking for re-employment, before Canterbury was surprisingly signed to a contract. Reports were that he looked old and wrestled poorly, perhaps not too shocking for someone who had been out of action for close to a decade, but an old friend with influence managed to secure him a job. And that old friend was Triple H, who had worked with Canterbury a lot during his early WWE days. The game had told other officials how Canterbury's son had recently passed away, how he needed a job, and how he missed wrestling, leading to the tryouts and eventual deal. Outside of a handful of dark and house show matches teaming with Ray Gordy, aka Jesse, he didn't do much and was released the same week as Scorpio. Number 8, Grandmaster SEXAY. Brian Christopher was fired by WWE in the spring of 2001 after he was caught trying to cross the Canadian border with drugs. While he avoided getting banged up abroad, he did receive his future endeavors and was forced to go back to work for Memphis, the Indies, and for promotions like Early Day TNA. He'd been reportedly trying to get back to WWE for a while and was finally given the opportunity in April 2004. His hiring was one of the last acts of Jim Ross before he passed the talent relations buck to John Laurinaitis, and was probably in truth done as a favor to Jerry Lawler, his longtime friend and broadcast partner and the father of Christopher. Grandmaster SEXAY's return was far from too cool, however, as he was squashed by Kane on Raw and then only made a few more televised most appearances, including quick losses to Christian and Garrison Cade. Christopher was fired just 1 month and 6 whole matches into his second run after he turned up late for a house show and received bad reports from agents who said his immature behavior was causing issues in the locker room. Given that he was putting over Chuck Palumbo in the second match on the card, unfortunately it's not like WWE had big plans for him anyway. Number 7, Just Incredible. When WWE decided to reboot ECW in the summer of 2006, they not only moved stars there from other brands and utilized the ex-ECW talent they already had on the roster, but brought in several ECW originals like the Sandman, Balls Mahoney, and Sabu. Those three had decent enough WWECW runs, all things considered, but former ECW champion Just Incredible did not. More like just insubstantial, am I right? Having previously worked as Aldo Montoya in the mid-90s and then come back as Just Incredible following the collapse of Paul Heyman's promotion, Credible knew the fickle WWE system well, but even he must have been disappointed by how his comeback played out. On television, Just Incredible was used to put over the likes of Kurt Angle and CM Punk, while on house shows he was paired with the Sandman in dueling Singapore cane matches. He clearly wasn't going to reach the heights he once had, as this new version of ECW was drastically different than the old and more focused on pushing up-and-coming talent, not names from the past. After no-showing several events and getting caught leaking information to wrestling websites, he was let go. Number 6, Rodney Mack. Rodney Mack was someone WWE clearly had at least some hopes for, as they tried to use him in a variety of ways before ultimately giving up on him. He was briefly aligned with John Cena on SmackDown before switching to Raw and getting a push under the management of Teddy Long while amassing a win streak via the White Boy Challenge. Once his tag team with Mark Henry ended, however, he became a spare part and was sent packing along with a bunch of other wrestlers in November 2004. Mack was recalled in the summer of 2006, like Just Incredible, to be a member of the ECW roster. His wife Jazz, also released on that day in November of 2004, was also brought back with him. The former women's champion got at least one televised match out of her second lap, but poor Rodney, who had worked some original ECW house shows as Red Dog, was confined to poorly attended live events. After months of inactivity, Mack and Jazz were once again released on the same day during another talent clear-out. Number 5, Eugene. The Eugene character, portrayed by veteran developmental territory prospect Nick Dinsmore, gets a lot of stick, and rightly so. But despite being problematic, there is no doubting that Eric Bischoff's kayfabe nephew was, at one point, a big star. Eugene Mania took over WWE in the summer of 2004 as the wrestler was pushed heavily and inserted into major storylines. It eventually all settled down and Eugene eased into a lower card comedy role for a time before he was released in September 2007. There's no doubting the character had run its course by that point, but WWE signed him back a couple of years later. This time, Eugene lasted 2 months and a grand total of 1 televised match, a contract on a pole match with the Calgary Kid, aka The Miz. Randy Orton, who was good friends with Dinsmore from their OVW days, pulled some strings to get him his job back, but when he came to Raw heavier than WWE officials desired, they immediately lost faith in him and cut him loose just 4 days later. Number 4, the Blue Meanie. The Blue Meanie was released by WWE the first time around, even though he had lost a massive amount of weight per their instruction. In interviews following his release, the Blue Guy spoke highly of his time in WWE, apart from not exactly enjoying a certain loudmouth Texan's backstage manner. Evidently, the comments ate away at JBL, who exacted revenge during the show-closing brawl at ECW One Night Stand, drunkenly teeing off on Meanie with live rounds. Never heard of that, more wrestling lists should cover it. In an attempt to dissuade him from filing a lawsuit against their former world champion, WWE lured Meanie with the promise of a short-term run as a means of compensation. And so Meanie was brought back almost a month after One Night Stand to work a match with JBL on SmackDown. JBL did the favors thanks to a major assist from Batista, but Meanie stuck around for a couple more matches with the reformed Blue World Order, one on Velocity and one against the Mexicals at the Great American Bash. Meanie's a great guy and all, but this whole saga played out just so WWE would be in his good graces and avoid litigation, and was ultimately a bit pointless. Number 3, Gangrel. One of the unsung heroes of the Attitude Era, Gangrel was only really around for a couple of years, but managed to make a lasting impression in that relatively short time. When he was brought back to work a fleeting angle with Viscera against The Undertaker as part of the Dead Man's feud with JBL, it was good to see him, even if he and Big Vis were completely squashed and promptly disappeared. What most people don't know is that though he disappeared from television, David Heath had in fact re-signed and was soon posted to Ohio Valley Wrestling, where he wrestled held for about 7 months. Anticipating a call-up, Gangrel was instead released during the mass firings of July 2005. That wasn't the end of his WWE story though, as the vampire came back from the dead a year later and put pen to paper once more. Told he would be starting on the ECW brand as part of a stable of bloodsuckers alongside Kevin Thorne and Ariel, Gangrel instead got stuck in developmental for months again until he was released in January of 2007 during another round of layoffs. Number 2, D'Lo Brown. D'Lo Brown was another Attitude Era success story and unsung hero from the time. The first Euro-Continental champion, putting on some great matches and being involved in some memorable storylines before an in-ring tragedy changed the course of his career. D'Lo was, understandably, never quite the same after the Droz incident, and the last couple of years of his WWE career saw him get used less and less, while also getting sent away to Puerto Rico and to help out in developmental. Post-WWE, Brown revived his career on the Indies and in Japan, but came back in the summer of 2008. He debuted with a bang, getting a good reaction from the live crowd before beating Santino Marella, and then nothing. Brown may have wrestled 50 matches for WWE that year, but only a few of them were on television, and he must have seen the writing on the wall when he jobbed to Mike Knox in 50 seconds on Raw. D'Lo was released in January of 2009, with WWE citing budget cuts as the reason. All D'Lo could do was shake his head. Number 1, Davey Boy Smith Jr. Though Davey Boy Smith Jr., who wrestled as Harry Smith and then David Hart Smith, had a decent run in WWE, when he left in 2011, there was a feeling that an opportunity had been missed. After all, this was the son of the late great British Bulldog, and he had all the tools necessary to become a bigger singles star after establishing himself as a tag team specialist alongside Tyson Kidd. Smith was burned out by the time he exited WWE and needed to rediscover his mojo, which he did on the Indies and in Japan over the course of the next decade. WWE were keeping tabs on him, and after he came back to induct his father into the WWE Hall of Fame and wrestle a dark match, he was signed to a deal. It turned out to be the most expensive dark match in WWE history, as Smith Jr. was hired in July, did sweet FA for months while being paid handsomely for the privilege, before his name came up in the list of people released due to budget cuts that November. There had been plans for him to re-debut on SmackDown as the Stampede Stud before the call from Johnny Ace. The Stampede Stud. Perhaps the release was a blessing after all.